Old Pat Buchanan's back, and he's decided, you know what, I just didn't spread enough hate in my lifetime, so let me have at it again. He goes to WorldNet Daily to write this fascinating article about how there has to be civil disobedience, or he's saying there doesn't have to be, but there could be, to make sure that gay people do not get their rights. So what's fascinating is he uses black pastors and Martin Luther King as part of his argument. Well, let's find out how. When Martin Luther King Jr. called on the nation to live up to the meaning of its creed, he heard an echo from 1,000 pulpits. Treating black folks decently was consistent with what Christians had been taught. Dr. King was pushing against an open door. Now, that is total and utter bullshit. Okay, the reality is, in the South, they often use the Bible to justify slavery back in the day, and then to justify oppressing black people for another 100 years. And they said, look, if you look at the Bible, there's slavery all over the Bible, which is true. And dark-skinned people are treated differently. Look at the story of Ham, and all these different justifications that they had. They used Christianity for that oppression all the time. It wasn't like the Christian pastors in the South all along had been like, God, we really got to get rid of slavery. Some, but not most. So all this revisionist history of like, well, us Christians, of course, us white Christians, we were always in favor of giving more rights to black people. My ass you were. You were picking on them before you got to the gays. Now that you can't pick on black people as much anymore, that's why you moved on to the gays. But nonetheless, Pat Buchanan continues with his particular brand of bullshit. He says, priests and pastors marched for civil rights. Others preached for civil rights, but if the gay rights agenda is imposed, we could have priests and pastors preaching not acceptance, but principled rejection. Now, look, were there priests and pastors that marched for civil rights? Absolutely. One particular preacher was named Martin Luther King Jr., Reverend Martin Luther King Jr., right? Now, if you're trying to appropriate his name, though, and say that he would have been against civil rights for gay people, well, that's just nowhere near true. And of course, it's exactly the kind of misappropriation that the Republicans and conservatives do all the time. Like, we don't care about the color of your skin, we care about the content of your character. Martin Luther King Jr. would have been on our side. Really, he would have been on the side of Glenn Beck, Rush Limbaugh, and Pat Buchanan. I don't think you know a thing about Martin Luther King Jr. Continuing, prelates could be declaring from pulpits everywhere that the triumph of gay rights is a defeat for God's country, and the new laws are immoral and need neither be respected nor obeyed. This is great. So, in the old days when they did civil disobedience, they were willing to have the courage of their convictions, get water hosed, attacked by wild dogs, etc., so that they could get their rights. This guy is advocating civil disobedience to take away other people's rights. Wow, what a moral crusade you've got in God's country. Something akin to this could be in the cards, he says, if homosexual rights movement is victorious. A public rejection of the new laws by millions and a refusal by many to respect or obey them. By the way, there is one thing he's right about. The civil disobedience in the old days, everybody thought it was Martin Luther King Jr. and the civil rights movement. And it was actually a little wrong, and Martin Luther King would often talk about this in his speeches. They had the law on their side. They were right. The Supreme Court had ruled in their favor. Congress had passed the Civil Rights Act in the middle of the movement. They would be up against local officials who were actually doing the civil disobedience. By continuing segregation, by attacking black protesters, it was actually the local sheriffs and the cops that were doing the civil disobedience. So Pat Buchanan is ironically wants to go back to that era and is saying to millions of Americans, if the laws say we can't discriminate against gays, let's go back to the good old days when we ignored the law and crushed people's civil rights anyway. We used to do it to blacks, now let's do it to gays. Always classy, Pat, always classy. Finally, he says, the cultural war in America today may be seen as squabbles in a daycare center compared to what is coming. A new era of civil disobedience may be at hand. Meaning, go get him, man. Do whatever you want to gays, but you certainly shouldn't respect the law. What happened? I thought you conservatives were all for rule of law. Unless, of course, the law is against you, in which you say, screw the law. Let's continue our hatred of certain Americans anyway. God, we're running out of Americans to hate. I mean, if they don't let us hate gays, who are we going to be left with? That's what Pat Buchanan is saying. And his fantasy about millions of people doing civil disobedience to make sure that they prevent gay rights is nothing but that. That's not going to happen. You're on the wrong side of history as usual, Pat Buchanan. You're going to lose. You're going to get crushed. There's not going to be a million people behind you. There's going to be nobody behind you. You're one of the vestiges of ancient hatreds, the ones that we are defeating right now.